lighting people. Today is our second part of a two-part series on the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, and respect. And we're here today with two people who come to it from the angle of being an architectural lighting designer, but they're also involved in our industry as leaders of various organizations or committees that focus on this very topic. So we're pleased to be joined today by Peter Hugh, who heads up his own architectural lighting design firm in Chicago, and also Edward Bartholomew, who also heads up his own architectural lighting design firm in the greater Boston area. Peter, Edward, so glad you're both here. Peter, let's start with you. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of activity surrounding DEIR in recent years, more than the years prior to that. And curious to know, when sometimes we talk about these issues, whether it be in an IES forum or in just other circles, sometimes there's criticism about how it's really not a lighting industry topic. How do you respond to that? Or maybe another way to word that is, why is DEIR a lighting industry topic?
Thank you, Al. I think the question really should be, what's taken so long for DEIR to be a lighting topic? Let's be honest, it's no secret that it took the murder of George Floyd and other similar incidents to hit the headlines for this to become an issue for a lot of these actions that we're seeing taking place. It's unfortunate that it took, these horrific incidents to bring this awareness to the forefront. But this is really wider than a political agenda. It's easy to lump it in, as you're saying, and to cry woke, not woke within it. And the fact is, IES was actually very criticized for putting our committee together and saying that we were jumping into a political scene just to be part of a trend versus anything else. The reason that DEIR should be in play is, political affiliations aside, it's a natural evolutionary progression of organizational growth. Let's be honest, if we do not welcome fresh ideas and point of views, we can't in all honesty state that we are looking out for the best interest of all people. In the case of IES, being the lighting authority, we have to be sure that our research, our technical standards, our education include the widest possible cultural audiences on the planet. That is what we claim we are and we do. So to do so accurately, we need to expand our resource base, our point of views, and our cultural interests. So that's why DEIR.
And it's a great opportunity too. I mean, you're expanding your markets as well, and you're bringing in fresh people to influence and to work on your project. So it's a win-win. It's a very positive movement.
For sure, and there's, I observe not only our industry, but related industries. So I'm on the AIA website literally 5 times a week, and they're doing many things. And so are other organizations tied to design and other aspects. In fact, I think one of those things is, which leads us to our next question, Ed, is that the AIA, I think there's close to 70% of AIA membership is Caucasian. 70, I think over 75% identify, and then more than 70 identify as male. So when we look at more the micro and talk about the lighting industry, Edward, and this is probably something that we could talk for 90 minutes about, but why aren't there more minorities in the lighting industry, and what can we do to make sure that everyone's getting a fair and equal shake at every opportunity?
Great question. First, I want to thank you, Al, for having me on this forum. When you look at the macro, you look at what the AIA has been trying to do for over 50 years or longer, trying to increase diversity within their ranks. It's been a long slog, and they've made incremental efforts and successes in doing that. The lighting industry has lagged behind them further. So when you look at the numbers, and we've done the numbers through the DEIR survey through the IES, and we could just look around at any conference. We could see that we do not represent the full range of people in our industry. We know that. So why that's occurring is basically about exposure. A lot of it is that certain populations are not exposed to this opportunity, this great career opportunity that's happening in lighting. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is try to integrate our work in education, and I teach, working with HBCUs, and I know my good friend Bob Davis is working with TCUs. So we're trying to expose more marginal and minority communities to lighting as a career opportunity. So that's one of the efforts to improve the the supply of people, the channel of people coming through. But the other thing is looking at people in mid-career, looking at opportunities and bringing them in, educating them, letting them know about opportunities. So, and then keeping those people there. So you could get people into these companies and they don't feel welcome. They feel alone and they feel unheard. So keeping them there is about inclusion and belonging. So those are the efforts that I think will help improve having more diverse workforce and greater participation from other minorities and populations.
Excellent point, Edward. And last week we talked with the largest lighting company in the world about this very topic, and the head of HR was describing that it's not just about the recruiting. That's an important component, but it's about the retention and the promotion and training and development and those aspects of it. So glad to hear that there's consistency from different industry perspectives on that topic. And Peter, earlier in this discussion, you had mentioned the George Floyd tragedies that inspired a lot of action around this. And here we are in May of 2023 recording this, which sadly is 3 years after that tragedy happened. And following that, in June of 2020 and later, we saw a lot of corporations and people putting out statements about their stance on diversity, equity, inclusion, and also anti-police brutality and other related stances as well. So 3 years should be enough time to see some progress. Maybe the whole world hasn't changed, but also there might be some statements that are out there that weren't backed up by a lot of action. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, as someone who spends a lot of time really focused on this matter, Peter, as it relates to the world, but also to the lighting industry, what changes have you seen over the last 3 years?
Honestly, I'm not sure how much progress I've personally witnessed. And it's not to say that people are not doing things. It's because a big part of that is, and I know from our role with IES and our committee, establishing foundation elements and progress happens behind the scenes. It doesn't necessarily come out for a while. You can make a splashy statement and say things, but the real progress is when a changed mindset and business cultural paradigm shift actually occur. What does this mean? It means that the DEIR methods become part of the company's DNA. And then, like ourselves, you can't see DNA, but you can see the actions of it afterwards. That's when notable changes really are seen. It's not like a headline hiring or celebrating key holidays. Those are, they can be kind of shallow. I mean, to be honest, anybody can kind of say that. It's when internal changes and acceptance, that the manufacturer, for instance, is not afraid to take a stand and to say something or do action and not be afraid of reprisal or a boycott of their product. And it's tough. That you're getting into realistic marketing and economic, answering to stockholders perhaps and so forth. But when they're willing to back that up, that's when I'll really see some progress. It's when they promote educational opportunities to underprivileged communities or schools because, good ideas, ethic, and enthusiasm can come from anyone, anywhere, not from a select few places. So that's what, to me, is when it'll become more notable. But, I have no reason to not believe that anything is happening either.
And I would add on to that it has, some progress has been made. And I look at organizations that have been spawned since the death of George Floyd. I look at one organization that I started called Black United in Lighting and Design, which is a kind of it's Black lighting professionals who are coming together and supporting each other, creating an affinity space so that we have a place to be safe and talk about our experience in lighting and design. And that's a very positive effort that's happening, including, and also light justice that's occurring as well. So, and looking at the IES and being in partnership with the IES, our symposium, where we really started exploring and looking at the practice of lighting design, that's a pretty, no one had ever looked at it in that way. So we look forward to our next symposium where we're actually looking at interior lighting and looking at that. all of these things, and looking at, to Peter's point, looking at the research, interrogating a lot of what we typically take for granted in our standards and things like that, realizing that there has been a white bias in all those things. So those are really positive things. We're opening up the lens in order to look at what we do and how we practice and how our industry functions and who do we have in our industry and how important it is to have people who look like those being impacted by our industry be represented in those high positions. So that's kind of the beginning of that awakening that's occurring, and I use that word awakening on purpose.
Thank you for those additional insights. And while much of our conversation today is focused on race, it should also be noted, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some other organizations like WILD or NACLIC, that they're focused on diversity from other angles that are also very important, and really just kind of promoting fairness and equity among all groups and minorities as well. So I think that's a fair comment too.
It's really about us being having an employee be his or her or their authentic self at work and being celebrated and being allowed to be that and to contribute in their fullness of who they are and not have to hide who they are or kind of navigate these type of treacherous places, but to be who they fully are. And that's exactly what this is all about.
And that's excellent. And Edward, a moment ago, you mentioned Light Justice, which is an organization that I believe either you founded or co-founded. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think it's kind of the intersection of the diversity, equity, inclusion, respect issue, intersecting with lighting and the application of lighting in urban areas, or any areas for that matter. Yeah.
Sure. Well, Light Justice, fundamentally, it's really supports the statement, everyone deserves good lighting and beneficial darkness. And it really looks at how can lighting support underserved marginal communities through both good design, good installation, good maintenance of the lighting within their communities, but also looking at how to engage those communities so that it could be co-designers working with them and engaging directly on these projects. So, you're not imposing something on them, but you're actually working in partnership with them. And that also includes inside buildings and looking at the vulnerable occupants within those buildings and how to design for them and not necessarily design for the privileged and the moneyed people, but looking at everybody who's actually impacting that building and actually probably there a lot longer than some of the people who we typically design for. So it's a reorientation of looking at our design practice and making sure that we address the concerns of everybody and not just a few and the privileged.
Edward, could you give me just a quick example of what a negative situation would be that Light Justice is trying to correct?
I can give you several examples. I could tell you an example that I had recently in Chicago, where I actually was at a place in Chicago called Little Village. And what was great is we were working with the Adler Observatory and a program called YOLO, Youth Organized for Lights Out. And basically, these young people from high school were actually documenting how light pollution was impacting them personally. And they took pictures and they wrote a narrative of the impact of how oppressive lighting was happening in their communities and was basically creating these hostile environments, these oppressive environments. And so working with them and trying to address that and to remedy that is something, and navigating the political system and the utility system in order to really correct some of those abusive situations is one of the situations that we're looking at. But that's exterior. We're looking now at interior too. And so how do we kind of reorientate ourselves toward making sure that everybody's empowered when we start designing for buildings? I know a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this, looking at back of house. How do we negate back of house as being the cheap place where we kind of do the least amount of work? But how do we empower those people to be as welcome and to be as empowered as the people who pay, who are out there and have the privilege and typically are the clients that we tend to work with and tend to ignore the folks who are really running the building itself. So it's a different way of reprioritizing what we do as designers.
Thank you for those insights as well. And Peter, when we think about other organizations, there's probably no other organization that impacts the lighting industry as much as the Illuminating Engineering Society does. And there's many subcommittees and committees that the IES operates. You head up one for the DEIR initiative. Tell us about that and what progress are you folks making?
Sure. Well, we were pretty much founded almost 3 years now. I think we're on a pretty good track. As I sort of alluded to earlier, we were founded, I don't want to say because of George Floyd, but again, that certainly inevitably brought things to light, no pun intended. Year one is what I refer to, and Edward also is on my committee as well. So we have mutual things in common, and he and I speak back and forth. But I called it the credibility tour. Before we could launch into all the things that IES wanted us to do, we had to make sure that members understood who we were, and more importantly, why we were. We had to fend off naysayers a good bit and tamper down fears and concerns, essentially, about the IES's going into political or other realm besides technical research and education of lighting. It was a concern that came up over and over and over. Year two was in establishing the goals to be incorporated into the IES. Our committee's charge, if you will, is to try to help the society enact change and enact things to create a more DEIR DNA. I use that term a lot. Within it itself. Someone once asked me, when is the job done? And I said, when we're no longer needed. It's just baked in. That's when it's done. It ain't going to be anytime soon. It's an ongoing process. We've enacted with other committees. We've talked to anything from the awards committee, education's committee. We're currently doing some things with the video conference, the color committee.
Sustainability committee. They actually have incorporated it.
Right. We were asked to be a part of the group that did the review and interviews and subsequent hiring of Colleen Harper as executive director. And Colleen has proven to be everything we could have prayed for as an ally for not just IES, but for our committee and our mission. In November, Edward mentioned the symposium that was put on. It was one of the first times IES has done a joint symposium with a group like this, but we had joint interest, and we certainly saw the all-around benefit, again, from the standpoint of lighting equity and fairness to IES's research and technical knowledge, and to marry these things together. And, we're hoping that relationship is maintained for quite a while. The last thing is, and it didn't start out being this way, but we've sort of found ourselves becoming ambassadors to all kinds of other groups, whether it be the IELD, LIRC, DOE. Colleen and I are now part of the Access Plus program, whereby essentially we've sort of become sort of a lighting go-to for groups all around. It's a little bit of a dance on our part because it's not why we were originally started, but I think it's important enough that we're not going to shy away from it.
Well, Peter, it's a lot of work. It's obviously important work, and appreciate what you're doing and the IES is doing to bring some of the factual aspects of these initiatives to light. No pun intended again. But thank you for that review. Anyone who's watching can get more information about Like Justice, more information about the IES DEIR committee with the links below on the YouTube video. And Peter, that's all the time we have today. So Peter, thank you for joining us today for 5 Big Questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for helping bring this topic. Again, I'm not going to use the pun to light, but I'm going to. Spread the word.
Thank you. And Edward, really appreciate you being here today, Edward. So thank you for taking time to share your perspectives on this important issue.
Thank you. And I appreciate you, Al, revisiting this topic. And I look forward to you revisiting it in a couple more years. And hopefully we'll be able to report to you some more progress that we're doing. Now, I just want to give a shout out. We're having a gathering called for lighting advocates, and that includes all the advocates who are out there who've been doing a lot of the work, selflessly throughout this time, from NACLIC to WILD to all the folks who have been doing stuff. We're having a gathering at Light Fair. So many of you already know about it who are your advocates, but if you don't, please reach out to us and we will plug you in and give you an invite.
Excellent. Thank you for the invitation. I think I RSVP'd yes already, so I will see you in New York later in the month of May. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Hey there, we really enjoyed that discussion. We hope that you did as well. Be sure to click that big LED logo next to me, and what that'll do is subscribe you to our YouTube channel so you don't miss the next 5 Big Questions interview. And YouTube subscribers always receive an early preview to the next interview before we even post it on the Inside Lighting website. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.